Min City, Cebu, and Manila. The recruitment offer presented to each was identical. A shipyard subcontractor position in the United States, 4 years of guaranteed employment, $2,200 per month in wages, full visa sponsorship. The visas were genuine. The employment authorization paperwork was genuine. The Labor Department sponsorship certifications were genuine. Every document each of the 14 workers received before boarding their flights had been processed through legitimate federal channels by an operator who understood precisely how to build a fraudulent structure inside authentic bureaucratic frameworks. What they were not told, the contractor badges carrying their photographs had stolen identities. Their social security numbers in the system were fabricated. The positions described in their contracts did not legally exist. Their wages would never be paid. And within 48 hours of clearing U.S. Customs, their original passports and identification papers would be taken from them. They arrived at Norfolk in October of 2025. Within 2 days, all 14 were inside the secured perimeter of the Naval Shipyard, inside Building C7, inside 3 shipping containers welded to the scaffold frame beneath the black weather tarp. The containers had been modified before the workers arrived. Sleeping pallets, foam mattresses, approximately 5 centimeters thick, were fixed to the interior walls. Ventilation cuts at floor level provided enough airflow to prevent lethal atmospheric buildup, but offered no temperature regulation. The containers ran cold in November and December. They ran hot by March. 1 portable toilet unit per container, sealed. 1 fluorescent light per container, on a manual switch controlled from the exterior wall. No windows. No natural light. No way to determine the time of day except by the schedule. The schedule was what structured everything. Every night at 11 p.m., the 14 workers were escorted from the containers through a guarded maintenance corridor connecting the scaffold annex to the main dry dock equipment hall of Building C7. They worked through the early morning hours, scrubbing accumulated corrosion from hull maintenance equipment, applying industrial sealant compounds to dry dock surfaces, sorting and cataloging mechanical components that had been staged for processing. Legitimate work. Necessary work. Billed by Pacific Rim Structural Services to the United States Navy under active line items of a valid service contract. At 5:30 a.m., 90 minutes before the morning gate rotation at Building C7 brought day shift personnel into the facility, the 14 workers were escorted back to the containers. The containers were sealed. The tarp was repositioned. The maintenance corridor access door was locked. The day shift arrived at 6 a.m. and saw what the scaffold annex had been designed for them to see: inactive storage space under contractor weather protection, awaiting the next authorized maintenance cycle. Federal investigators would later calculate that across the 5 months of forced labor, the 14 workers had generated approximately 900 hours of documented maintenance productivity against billing records submitted by Pacific Rim. Productivity that was invoiced to the Navy in full. Productivity for which the 14 individuals received nothing. Routine security audits were conducted at the relevant sections of Norfolk Naval Shipyard on a standard rotation throughout the period of the operation. The South Scaffold Annex of Building C7 appeared on the facility's administrative blueprints as an inactive equipment staging area, last formally assessed and updated in 2019. Not one audit checklist included it. Not one auditor passed through the tarp perimeter of the scaffold frame. 24 audits, 0 annex inspections. I spent time working through the audit documentation for this case. What I found wasn't conventional negligence. It was something more specific: engineered invisibility. The people who designed this operation understood, with apparent precision, which zones of a naval installation received routine security scrutiny and which zones existed in administrative blind spots where nothing was expected to be happening and therefore nothing was checked. They built inside a blind spot. That is not improvisation. That is the product of detailed institutional knowledge. Where that institutional knowledge came from would not become clear until the investigation was already 2 weeks old. And when it did, it changed the classification of the entire case. Patricia Howell's counterintelligence report had landed at the NCIS Norfolk Resident Agency on March 3rd. The in-person meeting occurred on March 6th. The working theory at that point: cargo diversion, someone routing unauthorized equipment through a secured naval perimeter using legitimate contractor access. A known vulnerability, low initial classification. The tasking was targeted review of Pacific Rim's contract files and the physical access logs associated with the 3 container IDs. What the first night of physical surveillance produced had nothing to do with cargo. March 8, 2026. 2 NCIS agents conducting covert foot surveillance from a position 400 meters east of Building C7's eastern approach observed a Pacific Rim security guard open a service door in the south scaffold frame at 11:13 p.m. 4 minutes later, 14 individuals in civilian work clothing filed through that door in single file. The security guard locked the door behind them. The surveillance footage, captured on a covert camera mounted to a utility pole at the observation position, resolved each individual's face at sufficient magnification to permit comparison against identification records. None of the 14 faces matched any of the 41 identity photographs in Pacific Rim's official contractor credentialing documentation. Stolen identities. 14 workers moving through a secured military installation on falsified contractor badges. The agent checked the active maintenance work order database for that night. 0 scheduled activity at Building C7. The case was escalated to NCIS headquarters within 12 hours. 3 federal entities were folded into the preliminary coordination structure within 48 hours of escalation. The FBI's Civil Rights Division, which holds primary federal jurisdiction over forced labor prosecutions under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. The Diplomatic Security Service activated for the foreign national dimension. A Navy SWAT tactical liaison from NCIS's Special Response Division. The decision was made not to move immediately. The tactical challenge was considerable. Building C7's South Scaffold Annex, combined with the sealed container configuration, created a hostage risk profile that made any imprecise breach potentially catastrophic. If a guard reached the container locking mechanisms during an uncoordinated entry, the team could find itself in a standoff with 14 people sealed inside metal boxes at a naval installation with limited negotiation options. The legal challenge was equally significant. The surveillance footage from March 8th was compelling, but insufficient for a forced labor prosecution without direct victim testimony or corroborating documentary evidence of the employment scheme. The team needed more before any breach could be authorized. The investigation ran on 3 simultaneous tracks over the next 14 days. Track 1, physical surveillance. Covert agents rotated through perimeter observation positions on 4-hour shifts, building a complete picture of the operational schedule at Building C7. By the end of the first week, the team had confirmed 5 Pacific Rim security guards per shift during overnight hours, with 1 supervisor making a circuit of the annex on a 90-minute rotation. A supply delivery, food, water, and sanitation materials, arrived via a contracted service van at 7:45 each morning, 3 times per week. The van was logged, photographed, and traced to a Chesapeake-based delivery service contracted to Pacific Rim under a secondary service agreement. The driver made his deliveries, received a signature from a Pacific Rim guard, and left without incident. He had no apparent awareness of what the deliveries were sustaining. Track 2, financial. NCIS financial investigators, coordinating with IRS criminal investigation, executed a warrant served on Pacific Rim's Virginia accounting firm. The official company payroll showed wages dispersed to all 41 contractor employees on a bi-weekly schedule, precise, formatted, and superficially auditable. Running parallel to it, a shadow disbursement structure, moving approximately $48,000 per month through a chain of shell entities registered in Delaware and Nevada, terminating at an account registered to a logistics company in the Cayman Islands. The 14 forced workers were receiving nothing. The shadow system was moving cash offshore with the consistency of a payroll cycle. Track 3, identity verification. Diplomatic security agents, operating through consular channels in Hanoi and Manila, quietly confirmed departure records for 11 of the 14 workers. All 11 had exited their home countries on legitimate visas, properly stamped and documented at their respective ports of departure. None had returned. None had filed immigration status updates with U.S. authorities consistent with any authorized working arrangement in the United States. Their identities had, in practical terms, disappeared inside the American administrative system. By March 16th, NCIS had sufficient documentation to charge Pacific Rim's principal executives with forced labor, visa fraud, and identity theft. The case was ready to move toward a breach authorization. That morning, a name appeared in the financial warrant documentation that did not belong to Pacific Rim. Active duty United States Navy. A mid-grade procurement officer assigned to the Naval Station Norfolk Contracting Office. His name appeared in Pacific Rim's internal communications under a coded designation, but the context was unambiguous. The contents of the communications described the dates and scope of upcoming security audit schedules at 3 East Coast naval installations, including the specific audit rotation at Norfolk. The communications extended back across 14 months. 24 security audits had been conducted at the relevant sections of Norfolk Naval Shipyard during the period of the forced labor operation. The South Scaffold Annex of Building C7 had not appeared on a single audit checklist, because someone inside the Navy had been telling Pacific Rim's executives when the auditors were coming and where they were going. The operation had a mole. Active duty, security cleared, inside the contracting office. If you've been following this case, hit subscribe, because the financial records also pointed to 3 other naval installations, and what was running inside Building C7 may have been one site in a network that investigators are still mapping. The discovery of an active duty insider changed the classification of the operation within 6 hours. First, operational security. Every tactical briefing, every communication, every staging plan had to be treated as potentially compromised. The full extent of the procurement officer's access to the breach planning was unknown. The number of individuals with complete tactical knowledge of the operation was reduced from 31 to 9. Second, legal classification. The joint federal investigation was elevated to a restricted access structure with separate communication protocols for the reduced inner team. Third, scope. The same financial warrant that produced the insider's connection to Pacific Rim also showed structurally identical shadow payment arrangements at 3 other naval installation contractor accounts. One at Naval Station San Diego, one at Naval Air Station Jacksonville in Florida, and one at Naval Station Bremerton in Washington State. Not confirmed forced labor operations at each site, not yet, but the financial pattern was identical to what NCIS had just spent 2 weeks mapping at Norfolk. Norfolk might have been the first node to unravel, not the only node. Here's the position that will get disagreement. The procurement officer's compromise of the audit process isn't primarily a story about one corrupted individual. It's a story about a credentialing and oversight structure that conducted 2 background reinvestigation cycles on this person during the 14 months he was providing Pacific Rim with advance audit notice, renewed his clearance both times, and detected nothing. The system assumes integrity unless caught in the act. That assumption is exactly what the architects of this operation built their survival strategy around. The question of how many other contractors inside the defense maintenance system have made the same calculation and haven't yet been caught is one the public record, as of June 2026, has not answered. The tactical brief for Building C7 was finalized on March 19th. Primary breach element, 10 NCIS Special Response Team agents. Supporting tactical element, 8 Navy SWAT operators. Outer perimeter, 4 diplomatic security agents. Victim interface at point of extraction, 2 FBI Civil Rights Division specialists, including a Vietnamese language agent stationed specifically for container-side communication. Shipyard K9 unit, 2 handlers, 2 dogs, Stage for any secondary building sweep following the initial breach. Total operational footprint, 26 personnel. Primary entry point, the North Utility Corridor of Building C7. The corridor ran 112 meters from the North Maintenance Access Door to a T intersection inside the building. At the T intersection, the breach force would split. 6 agents west toward the scaffold annex and the containers, 4 east to secure the dry dock equipment hall and cut off any guard who had moved in that direction. Secondary breach, Navy SWAT on the main south access door of the scaffold annex, executed simultaneously with the North Corridor entry to prevent any guard near the container access points from reaching the exterior locking mechanisms. On the morning of March 17, when a covert monitoring team attempted to confirm the interior layout of the annex through a compromised feed from a building C7 security camera, the feed was offline. Pacific Rim's maintenance records listed the camera as having gone dark 4 days earlier. Officially a power supply fault pending contractor repair. The tactical team's floor plan for the scaffold annex was derived from facility blueprints filed with the Navy's management database. Those blueprints dated to 2014. They showed the south scaffold annex as an open equipment staging platform. No enclosed structures, no container installations. The actual physical configuration inside the tarp, 3 welded containers in an L configuration, was not represented anywhere in the documentation the team had been working from. They were planning a breach of a space whose interior geometry was unconfirmed. This is the kind of obstacle that in less disciplined operations gets absorbed into the plan and noted as an acceptable unknown. Rubin didn't accept it. At 3 a.m. on March 18th, 2 NCIS agents in civilian contractor coveralls entered the building C7 complex through the North Utility Corridor using access credentials that had been quietly lifted from Pacific Rim's administrative files 12 hours earlier. They carried compact thermal imaging equipment. They spent 41 minutes on the maintenance mezzanine 8 meters above the annex floor, mapping the structure below in complete silence. What they recorded, 3 shipping containers, welded to the scaffold platform in an L configuration. Each container approximately 6 meters by 2.4 meters. Ventilation cuts visible at floor level. 1 exterior access door per container. Heavy-gauge steel construction with external locking mechanisms, the type used for high-security storage containers. 14 thermal signatures distributed across the 3 containers. All alive, most asleep. 6 guard signatures on the ground level and upper mezzanine. 1 extra body beyond the 5-person roster. Unaccounted for. The survey team extracted through the North Corridor without incident. The thermal map gave Rubin the interior geometry he needed. It also confirmed that the breach, when it came, would need to account for a guard count that was 1 higher than the filed documentation said it should be. The operation was set for 4:17 a.m. on March 21st, 2026. James Rubin's team carried 3 unresolved variables into the breach. Variable 1, the insider. The naval procurement officer had been placed under discreet surveillance on March 19th. As of 4 a.m. on March 21st, he was at his off-base residence and had made no tracked outgoing communications in 6 hours. But discreet surveillance is not controlled surveillance. If he maintained a dead-drop alert system, a prearranged signal that didn't require a phone call or digital transmission, the agent's positioning at Building C7 had no way to confirm he hadn't already triggered it. Variable 2, the guard count. 6 thermal signatures on March 18. Filed Pacific Rim roster, 5. The extra body remained unidentified and unassigned in any document the team had been able to obtain. Variable 3, the people inside the containers themselves. Put yourself in the position of one of those 14 individuals for a moment. 5 months inside a sealed container at a secured naval installation. Original documents taken. Told by Pacific Rim's personnel, according to later victim testimony, that any contact with outside authorities would result in deportation, criminal prosecution for the identity fraud they had unknowingly been made part of, or harm to family members who remained in Vietnam and the Philippines. No windows, no outside contact, no calendar access. No awareness that 63 pages of manifest documentation had triggered a federal counterintelligence investigation. No awareness that anything was about to change. At 4:17 a.m. on March 21st, they were asleep in the containers. 90 minutes into the low-activity window, when the overnight guards typically move to a reduced attention posture on the mezzanine above. The North Utility Corridor magnetic lock accepted the credentials at 4:17 in 12 seconds. The formation entered, 112 meters. The T intersection, 6 agents west, 4 east. At 4:17 in 22 seconds, Navy SWAT dropped the south main access door with a pneumatic entry ram. 1 second of contact. The Pacific Rim Guard at that interior post was in restraints at 4:17 and 34 seconds. He had not keyed his radio. The 2 guards on the annex ground floor were secured within the next 90 seconds. The 5th guard, who had moved to the mezzanine stairwell, was intercepted at the top landing with his radio in his hand. The radio was not keyed. The 6th guard, the unaccounted-for body from the thermal sweep, was located in the service room adjacent to the main annex entry. He was asleep in a folding chair. He was the last to be secured at 4:21 a.m. 6 guards, 6 minutes and 43 seconds from initial corridor entry. None had transmitted. The containers were next. Before we get to what NCIS found when those doors opened, if this case matters to you, drop a like. The next 12 minutes inside Building C7 are documented in federal proceedings that won't be fully public for months. The breach plan had been built on the assumption that the external steel latches were the primary and possibly only locking mechanisms on the container doors. That assumption was incorrect. 2 of the 3 containers had been modified with interior toggle bolt mechanisms, a secondary locking system that could be engaged from either side of the door. 1 container's exterior latch had been set by the night guard before he ascended to the mezzanine. The other 2 containers had their interior toggles in the engaged position. 2 containers were locked from the inside. The agents reached the container access doors at 4:22 a.m. The exterior latches disengaged cleanly. The doors did not move. What's most surprising about this case, and I keep returning to it in the documentation, isn't the architecture of the scheme. It's this. 5 months of captivity had produced a specific behavioral response among the workers that Pacific Rim's executives had not anticipated and that NCIS could not have predicted. At some point in the preceding weeks, 2 of the containers had been fitted with the interior toggle mechanisms, apparently as an additional containment measure. What Pacific Rim did not anticipate was that the workers would learn to use them from the opposite direction. Any sound outside the container that fell outside the established 11 p.m. or 5:30 a.m. schedule, any deviation from the pattern that had governed their existence for 5 months, triggered a lockdown from within, not an escape attempt, not an alarm signal. A defensive response developed out of 5 months of operating inside a system defined entirely by the behavior of their captors. A federal raid approaching silently through a utility corridor at 4 a.m. sounded to the people inside those containers the same way any nighttime deviation from schedule had sounded for months. They locked the door. What do you think? Does this represent a failure of the federal contracting system, or the inevitable result of a procurement model that outsources security access to the same entities being overseen? Comment below. The FBI Civil Rights Division team had positioned its Vietnamese language specialist at the first locked container at 4:22 a.m. for exactly this contingency. She spoke through the steel door, not commands, not instructions, not a legal notification. She said who she was, what agency she represented, what was happening outside the door, that the guards had been secured, that it was safe to open. She repeated this in measured pacing for 4 minutes and 18 seconds. The toggle disengaged, the door opened. 3 individuals inside. 1 adult man, nearest the door, approximately 30 years old. 2 women behind him, positioned against the sleeping pallets on the far wall. All three in work clothing. The interior of the container carried the smell of industrial solvent and recycled air. The man, later identified through consular records as a 29-year-old from Hoi An in central Vietnam, looked at the FBI agent for several seconds without moving. He asked in Vietnamese whether the guards were gone. She told him they were. He stepped back from the door and allowed the extraction team inside. The second locked container, 4 individuals inside, opened at 4:26 a.m. after the Vietnamese language agent repositioned and repeated the same approach. The third container, which had only an external latch, was opened directly by agents at 4:29 a.m. At 4:37 a.m., all 14 individuals were in the medical staging corridor, pre-positioned in the building's C7 administrative section. 14 adults, all alive. On the interior wall of the second container, scratched into the steel above one of the sleeping pallets, a column of dates. The earliest read October 14th, 2025. The most recent, March 20th, 2026, the night before the raid. 157 dates. At 6:14 a.m. on March 21st, as evidence packaging continued inside Building C7, NCIS executed 3 simultaneous arrests across the Hampton Roads metropolitan area. Marcus Tran, 44, Pacific Rim's chief operating officer, arrested at his Virginia Beach residence. At the moment agents entered, he was on a video call with a number registered to a logistics entity in Singapore. The laptop was secured as evidence and transferred to NCIS's digital forensics unit within the hour. David Park, 51, the company's chief financial officer, arrested at a hotel adjacent to Norfolk International Airport. His luggage was packed. He had a 7:15 a.m. departure to Los Angeles with a connecting service to Seoul. His room key was still on the nightstand when agents knocked. Raymond Vo, 38, the operational manager responsible for the annex logistics, nightly guard schedules, and worker rotation. Arrested at a 24-hour diner in Chesapeake. He had ordered breakfast. He did not finish it. The naval procurement officer, the active duty insider, was taken at his base housing unit at Naval Station Norfolk at 6:21 a.m. His case was transferred immediately to the NCIS Military Justice Division. As of June 2026, his status remains sealed under active court proceedings. The evidence warrant executed at Building C7 produced the $2.3 million in vacuum-sealed currency. Distributed across 11 fire-resistant cases, each bolted into a floor-level compartment hidden beneath the scaffold platform. The compartment was accessible through a recessed panel in the scaffold decking that would not have been visible to anyone conducting an inspection from above. Adjacent to the compartment, a portable document shredder powered on and warmed to the touch when agents reached it. Next to the shredder, a partial stack of administrative records that forensic analysts estimated had been in active processing within the last 48 hours. Someone inside the operation had begun a cleanup 2 days before the breach. One detail that stayed with me when I went through the evidence documentation: the shredded materials. FBI forensic analysts were able to partially reconstruct 17 of the destroyed documents using standard laboratory processes. Among the reconstructed pages, 6 sets of original identity papers belonging to 6 of the 14 workers, passports, identification cards, employment certificates from their home countries. Those documents had been in the process of being destroyed on the morning of March 21st, 2026. Whatever they represented as a legal liability to Pacific Rim's executives, whatever information they contained that linked the company to the fraud pipeline in ways the digital records might not, was considered worth eliminating in the final hours before an anticipated legal reckoning. 6 of the 14 victims received their original documents back. 8 did not. Those 8 sets of identity papers have not been recovered as of this account. Here's what this case tells us about a specific vulnerability in federal contracting: the operational capability required to embed a forced labor scheme inside an active military installation. legitimate corporate registration, valid Defense Department credentials, functional visa processing, a corrupted inside source with clearance access, is not assembled quickly. It takes years to build. The relationships, the institutional knowledge, the understanding of which administrative zones are watched and which aren't, which means that the version of this operation that got caught at Norfolk is not necessarily the only version that was constructed. It's the first one that someone with 63 pages of manifest data and 21 years of pattern recognition refused to let go. All 14 adult workers were transported to a federal medical facility within 90 minutes of extraction. Medical assessment confirmed conditions consistent with prolonged captivity under forced labor, malnutrition, dehydration, respiratory irritation from sustained exposure to industrial solvent compounds in an enclosed space. Within 72 hours, all 14 had been transferred to a federal protected transitional housing program. All 14 have since received T visas under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and have been enrolled in federal witness protection programs, pending trial proceedings that are expected to extend into 2027. The case was sealed for 9 weeks following the raid. The federal indictment was unsealed on May 27, 2026. As of the unsealing date, the scope of inquiry had expanded to include preliminary investigations at Naval Station San Diego, Naval Air Station Jacksonville, and Naval Station Bremerton in Washington State. A fourth site, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Maine, was added to the inquiry scope on June 3, 2026. Marcus Tran, David Park, and Raymond Vo face federal charges including forced labor, visa fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. The Singapore registered logistics entity reached during Tran's arrest call is under active review by the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control. The full extent of the financial pipeline connecting Pacific Rim to any offshore infrastructure has not been confirmed in any public filing as of this account. Will this pattern emerge at a second installation? Comment yes or no, because the answer depends entirely on whether the naval facilities currently under inquiry have identified and closed the administrative blind spots that allowed Building C7's scaffold annex to operate outside the audit rotation for 7 months. Nothing in the public record as of June 2026 confirms that they have. Patricia Howell, the supply clerk who filed the flagged manifest report on March 3, 2026, was transferred to a protected federal administrative posting on April 7th, pending conclusion of the proceedings. Her name appears under a protective order associated with the case. She has not spoken publicly. Her attorney has declined all media requests on her behalf. 21 years at the same desk. 63 pages of highlighted manifest logs. One flagged discrepancy that a form letter told her wasn't worth reviewing. The forced labor operation at Norfolk Naval Shipyard has been dismantled. 4 other naval installations remain under active federal inquiry. Somewhere between the sealed floor compartment beneath the scaffold platform and the Singapore number Marcus Tran was calling at 6:14 a.m., there is a financial pipeline that investigators have not yet fully mapped, and 8 workers are still waiting to get their names back. Script end title. The supply clerk who flagged 3 containers and freed 14 captives inside the Navy. Title and description. A civilian supply clerk at Norfolk Naval Shipyard noticed 3 container IDs cycling through Gate 4 with no corresponding work orders, and triggered the largest forced labor raid ever conducted on a U.S. military installation. What NCIS found inside Building C7, 14 adult captives in welded shipping containers, $2.3 million in vacuum-sealed cash, a contractor badge fraud system, and an active-duty Navy insider who had been feeding Pacific Rim the audit schedule for 14 months. March 2026, Norfolk Naval Shipyard, NCIS plus FBI Civil Rights plus Navy SWAT. For 5 months, Pacific Rim Structural Services, LLC, held 14 Vietnamese and Filipino nationals under forced labor inside a scaffold annex hidden in plain sight within a secured naval perimeter. They worked the dry dock equipment hall from 11 p.m. to 5:30 a.m., then were locked back inside the containers before the morning gate rotation. The operation survived every audit because someone inside the contracting office was making sure it would. This is how Patricia Howell's 63 pages of manifest data ended it. Description _ end intro, welded inside the Navy intro, _ end additional ALT1, aggressive storm / raid. NCIS breach, Norfolk Naval Shipyard. 14 captives found in welded containers. $2.3 million seized ALT2. Informative. How 14 adults were hidden inside welded containers at a U.S. naval shipyard for 5 months. ALT3, victim / scale. NCIS frees 14 forced laborers from welded containers at Navy shipyard. Contractor ring exposed ALT4 with series tag. Supply clerk who freed 14 captives from inside the Navy. FBI files. Additional end. Cover. Navy SWAT operators in full tactical gear force open a heavy steel container door welded to a scaffold inside a flood-lit naval annex at 4 a.m. The door swings wide to reveal a dim interior with foam sleeping pallets fixed to the walls, a single hanging fluorescent light, and a column of scratched dates covering the steel wall from floor to ceiling. Cover _ end ======.